everyone. This is Emily B here, also known as Grandma B's, and I'm the owner and baker at Grandma B's Mini Treats, and I'm also the dessert maker at a local restaurant called Feast in the town that I live. So I don't do a ton of savory, but this is a whole line of savory that I love to do, and it's going to be Cheez-Its, as you might be able to tell by the block of sharp cheddar cheese that I have here. And I'm actually today using a local sharp cheese made by the Sisters Meat Company that's also here in the town that I live. Best thing about these copycat Cheez-Its is, they're Cheez-Its. Everybody loves Cheez-Its. They're perfect as a snack at parties. When you have a party like barbecue, whatever, you put a bowl of Cheez-Its out and it's amazing to see people's reaction. It's most of the reason I make copycat treats like Cheez-Its is people just get so excited, and they're from scratch. So they're not the box version that has a bunch of other stuff in it that isn't necessarily good for us, even though I love the box Cheez-Its. This is a close copycat recipe that we're gonna work through today. This is what I call prepare ahead of time dough. So once we make the dough, which is super quick and simple, we're actually gonna refrigerate it overnight. I just think it brings the flavors together a little bit more if you do that before you bake it. And you can also freeze the dough. Just pull out a little bit at a time as you need it. I will say that this is a recipe that you wanna plan for in terms of your bake time, because rolling the dough out, cutting them and preparing them and baking them takes a little bit of extra time and care. Totally worth it, but it's not just say a quick batch of cookies that you're gonna pop in the oven and walk away from until the timer goes off. I have 8 ounces of sharp cheddar cheese. The fun thing about making this copycat recipe, and I'm gonna start doing this and hopefully have some videos, is you can use all kinds of different flavors of cheeses. So I am just sticking with the traditional for this first video, and we're gonna be using cheese. I've got about 2 ounces or 4 tablespoons of regular butter. You can use unsalted and just adjust as needed. I'm gonna grate all of this. It'll go into the food processor, which I find is a little bit easier to use than say a mixer, just because it's like making a pie dough kind of, but the cheese makes it a little bit harder to bring it all together. If you don't have a food processor, you can also do it by hand. It just takes a little bit of extra muscle work, but can completely be done. Cheese, butter, we've got some spices, and you can play with the spices, but I use a tiny bit of onion powder, a little bit of paprika, some vinegar, and some salt. And I find that the vinegar, which is actually my daughter-in-law's idea, definitely adds a little bit of that bite that you find in the box Cheez-Its. Once I get all that in the Cuisinart, I'll add a little bit of flour and some water. Again, really a variation of a pie dough, just with cheese, and that'll be that. So let's go ahead and get started. Okay, we've got our 4 tablespoons of butter and 8 ounces of sharp cheddar cheese in the Cuisinart. And again, I freshly grate it. I don't think I mentioned this before. I grate it myself. I grate the butter as well, because that's just so much easier of a way to evenly incorporate it. I do that for pie dough as well. So next we're just going to add here some of our spices. So I'm gonna do a ½ teaspoon of salt. And again, if you used unsalted butter, you can do a little bit more salt just to make up for that if you want to, or not, completely up to you. And then, like I mentioned before, really just a touch of some other spices. I've got a 1/4 teaspoon of paprika. You can add a little bit more if you want. In there. I'm gonna use a 1/4 teaspoon of, 1/4 teaspoon of vinegar, which I know doesn't sound like much. I go back and forth between adding a little bit more, so you could go up to ½ teaspoon if you wanted to. I just like to have a hint of vinegar in the cracker, like literally just a hint. And then Lastly, we're gonna do about 1/8 of a teaspoon of onion powder. I don't have an 1/8 measure, so I just do about 1/2 of my 1/4 teaspoon. And again, it doesn't have to be exact because some of the flavoring is really personal preference. So we are gonna go ahead and pulse this together just like you would a pie dough. Just do maybe about 10 to 12 pulses. Next is our flour. When you weigh it out, it's about 125 grams of flour. I don't necessarily worry. I usually weigh all my measurements. I'm not that worried about my Cheez-It dough. It's a little forgiving, and I feel like a lightly filled cup, then sifted, does the job just fine. So, but again, I always do sift my flour. So we're gonna go ahead and add the flour. Make a mess while we do it. And then this I do, it's probably around 14 pulses. You want it to look kind of like breadcrumbs, essentially. Okay. So you now have kind of a crumbly, cheesy, almost cornmeal texture dough. And then the last thing we're gonna do is 2 tablespoons of water. Just sprinkle that around in there. And then we're gonna pulse again until it starts coming together. Again, just like a pie dough, but don't have to be quite as careful. And this is probably somewhere between 12 and 14 pulses. And you'll see it start coming together. Okay, take it off. So this is what it looks like. You can pinch it and it will stay together. And from here, I forgot to bring my plastic wrap. I'm going to put them in 2 separate discs, flatten them out of it, wrap them up, and put it in the freezer. You'll see that in just a second. If I'm going to bake them the next day, I just will refrigerate it. But the refrigeration will allow the spices and the flavor to come together really well before you bake it. And it's really that simple. You can use different flavored cheese, you can use different spices. So I'm gonna go ahead and wrap this up, and then next will be the rolling out and the baking. All right, we're back with the Cheez-It dough. Mine has been in the freezer for about a week. I took it out and put it in the refrigerator last night so it could defrost overnight. And now I've had it sitting out for maybe about 10 minutes just to soften it up a little bit, and it's a little bit easier to roll. So let's go ahead and get going. All right, I've got this test batch rolled out thin, and when I say thin, I mean, you know, we're talking maybe 1/3 of a centimeter even. Definitely under 1/8 of an inch, but you can again play with the thickness. These puff up a little bit while cooking, or baking I should say, which is why I like to have them pretty thin. I mean, it's not quite see-through the dough, but it is fairly close. So once we have it rolled out, the next step is to cut it. And this is where it gets a little bit time consuming. So you have to have a love of homemade Cheez-Its to want to do this. And you can cut it a couple different ways. If you have a pastry cutter, which you can get on Amazon, not super expensive, this will quicken things up because you just really can just do a couple swipes. Most of us, and this is how I did it for a long time, was just with ruler and a knife. And frankly, you can also just eyeball it with a knife, whatever works for you. I'm gonna go ahead and use the ruler because I think most of us probably have that available. And I'm just gonna cut and think of what a Cheez-It looks like. It's just really a square or a little rectangle with holes poked in it. So we'll go ahead and get these cut. I'm gonna do half of it for now so we can show everybody, and you'll cut it again, of course, to make your squares. Oh dear. And then the most important part is we have to poke holes. Now, if you've got a skewer, toothpick, cake pop stick, I'm out of my skewer, so I'm using a little baking tool that I use sometimes for decoration, and you'll just poke a hole into the center of each Cheez-It, just like this. It's probably a little difficult to see. Then we're gonna get these placed onto a baking sheet. Now I have one of these baking sheets that is great for all the way around baking. It gets the crackers crisp underneath. You don't have to have one of these for a long, long time. I just went ahead and used regular old cookie sheet, and we'll go ahead and do that too. So we're gonna line up our Cheez-Its. I'll go ahead and do this a little bit quicker for you. And when the tray is full, we're gonna sprinkle some flake salt on it, pop it in the oven, and give our Cheez-Its a try. All right, first tray is almost ready to go in the oven. You'll notice that I have given them a little bit of space, so they're not all, why can't I speak today? They're not all smushed up against each other. You want them to have a little bit of room to bake. They're not necessarily all gonna bake perfectly evenly. Remember, these are homemade, so they're not uniform in sizes necessarily, and that's okay. We can certainly spend more time on making them more uniform, but at the end of the day, you just want something really yummy that friends and family are gonna enjoy, and they don't have to be perfect to get that. Our last step, after having poked holes into each one of these and putting them on the tray, is to sprinkle them with a generous amount of flake salt. You can use Malden salt. I'm using Jacobsen salt. It's a local company to Oregon, so have to support our local people. We're just gonna go ahead and sprinkle it all over the tray, and then we are going to pop them in the oven. It's at 400 degrees right now, and I'm gonna start checking these for doneness around 6 minutes in. And I'll pull the tray out of the oven, move them around a little bit, just make sure nothing's getting stuck, and then possibly even take some off the tray if they look like they are done before the others. So here we go. So we are getting pretty close with this first tray of Cheez-Its. Sometimes, partially during the bake, I will take some off. I keep an extra tray where I can pop the cooked Cheez-Its on so they can cool. That way, I can easily allow them to cool and crisp up while the rest of my Cheez-Its bake. All right. Our Cheez-Its are done. I am gonna put them on our cooling tray here. They will have some time to sit. Sometimes after they're on the cooling tray for a bit, if I feel like I want them to crisp up just a bit more, I can actually put them back in the oven with the oven off, or the door open just a crack, and let them get a little extra crispy. In my family, my stepdaughter likes them really crispy, kind of close to almost burnt, extra toasted, I think they call it. Whereas the rest of the family likes them a little more traditional. So I never mind having a little bit of difference in terms of color and crispness because it makes someone happy somewhere. All right, well, I actually, while I have been waiting for these to bake, have prepped a couple more trays, and I'm gonna give some pepper jack Cheez-Its a try. So this is a different flavor cheese dough. So hopefully I'll have these to show you as well. We're gonna let these cool a little bit and then we'll do a taste test. We have our homemade COPYCAT Cheez-Its. So this is the traditional recipe with sharp cheddar, which I showed in the video all the way through. This is the pepper jack that I ended up doing just for fun. And you can see, you know, the color has, you know, kind of the, not super orange like the box because I didn't add any of the cheddar powder. This is all natural. This is the color that it looks like. I've got a few different sizes and shapes. And the fun part about these COPYCAT Cheez-It crackers is you can play with the size, you can play with how thin or thick it is, the bake. Do you want them extra crispy, not super crispy? It's really personal preference, and having a little bit of each is kind of fun too. So the pepper jack is the same thing. The color, of course, comes out a little bit different, but it's a nice pop of surprise. This batch, one batch of the Cheez-Its and the recipe that's part of the video will make about 9 ounces. The perfect amount for a party, for a week's worth of snack bags in a kid's lunch. I love to add these to a great charcuterie board for a party, or just give them as gifts because people are always really surprised. So let's take a bite and see. I think you will be happy with the cheesy flavor. It's always kind of a fun surprise. Now let's try the pepper jack. Haven't tried it yet. Still has that nice cheesy flavor with a little bit of kick at the end. This, I think, is going to be a fun addition. So I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope you try the crackers and play with the flavors and the sizes and let me know what you think. Thanks very much.